Some bands have one golden era, others have two. The Rolling Stones had neither. They had 5 decades of reinvention, survival, and defiance, powered by songs that refused to let them disappear quietly into rock history. The setup. There is a question that follows every band that survives long enough to become legendary. Not how they get famous, but how they stay famous. Fame arrives in a rush, loud and sudden and seemingly permanent. Staying famous is something else entirely. It requires reinvention, resilience, and the willingness to keep going when every rational voice is suggesting that the moment has passed and the world has moved on to something newer and shinier. For the Rolling Stones, that question arrived not once but twice, in circumstances separated by a decade, but connected by the same essential stakes. Both times, the band was facing the genuine possibility that it was over. Both times, the music saved them. But before we get to salvation, we need to understand the crisis, because without the depth of the fall, the height of the comeback makes no sense. By the early 1970s, the Stones had already survived more than most bands encounter in a lifetime. The departure of Brian Jones, his death in a swimming pool days later, the disaster of Altamont, the revolving door of legal troubles and personal chaos that seemed to follow them everywhere they went. They had survived all of it. But survival and greatness are not the same thing. And by 1971, the question was no longer whether the Stones could survive. It was whether they could still make music that mattered. The breaking point. In 1971, the Rolling Stones became tax exiles. The British government's decision to impose a 90% tax rate on high earners left them with a straightforward choice: leave England or watch the majority of everything they had built disappear into the treasury. They chose to leave, packing up their lives and relocating to the south of France, with the vague intention of recording a new album while they were there. The timing could not have been worse. Keith Richards was in the grip of a heroin addiction that was consuming more of his energy and attention with each passing month. Mick Jagger was distracted by his wedding to Bianca and the social world that came with it, a world that was pulling him increasingly towards celebrity and away from the raw creative instincts that had always been the band's real engine. The record label was nervous. The band had not released a proper studio album in 2 years, and the pressure to deliver something significant was building steadily. What made the situation even more precarious was the complete absence of any conventional recording infrastructure. There was no studio booked, no schedule set, no producer firmly in place. There was just the band, a mobile recording truck parked outside a rented villa, and the chaotic energy of whatever happened to be going on inside that building on any given day. By any rational assessment, the conditions were completely wrong for making great music. The villa. Nelcote was a 19th century villa on the French Riviera that Keith Richards had rented for the summer of 1971, and it became the most improbable recording studio in the history of rock music. The basement of the building was converted into a makeshift workspace where the band would gather, theoretically to record, though the word theoretically deserves emphasis because the sessions operated on no recognizable schedule and under no conventional discipline whatsoever. The cast of characters passing through Nelcote that summer reads like something from a novel nobody would believe. Musicians, dealers, hangers-on, friends, strangers, and an assortment of people whose exact role in the proceedings was never entirely clear. The heat was oppressive. The power kept cutting out. Equipment malfunctioned constantly. Keith was often unavailable at the hours when recording was actually supposed to happen, which meant that everyone else sat around waiting in the humid basement while the clock ran and the record label's patience ran thinner. And yet the music that emerged from that basement was miraculous. There is no other word for it. The chaos, the heat, The dysfunction, the loose and rambling sessions that stumbled forward without clear direction, all of it somehow produced a sound that was unlike anything the Stones had recorded before. Raw and warm and physical in a way that more organized sessions might never have achieved. The looseness that looked like a liability turned out to be the album's greatest asset, giving it a quality that no amount of studio precision could have manufactured. If you are the kind of person who believes that the greatest music comes from the most unlikely places, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring these stories with us. There is so much more to come. Let us continue. Tumbling Dice. Out of those chaotic Nelcoat sessions came Tumbling Dice, and it remains one of the purest distillations of what the Rolling Stones actually are at their core. Not the dangerous provocateurs of Sympathy for the Devil, not the tender balladeers of Wild Horses, but something in between and somehow beyond both. A song that grooves and shuffles and pulls you forward with an irresistible momentum that makes it almost impossible to stand still while it is playing. The song began as a riff that Keith Richards had been carrying around for a while, a loose rolling chord progression that suggested movement and chance, and a certain cheerful recklessness about where things were headed. Mick Jagger built the lyrics around the metaphor of dice, of gambling, of the kind of person who lives entirely in the present moment because the future is just another roll of the bones. It was simple and direct and completely without pretension, which is precisely why it worked so completely. What elevated it beyond a good album track into something genuinely special was the performance. The backing vocals provided by Clyde King and Vanetta Fields gave it a warmth and a gospel undertow that the band's own voices could not have achieved alone. The rhythm section locked into a groove that felt effortless in the way that only deeply rehearsed musicians playing completely in the moment can sound effortless. And Keith's guitar, loose and conversational rather than technically demanding, gave the whole thing a human quality that studio perfection would have destroyed. The Second Crisis. By the late 1970s, the world had changed around the Rolling Stones in ways that threatened to make them obsolete almost overnight. Punk had arrived with the specific and loudly stated intention of destroying everything that bands like the Stones represented. The Sex Pistols and The Clash were not just making new music. They were making an argument that old music and the bloated, self-satisfied rock stars who made it deserved to be torn down completely. The Stones, with their private jets and their enormous touring productions and their decades of accumulated excess, were exactly the kind of target that punk had been invented to attack. Disco, meanwhile, had taken over the mainstream charts with a thoroughness that left very little room for guitar-based rock of any kind. Radio programmers were dropping rock acts from their playlists. Record labels were redirecting budgets toward artists who could compete in the new landscape. The commercial environment that had sustained the Stones throughout the 1970s was shifting beneath their feet with a speed that left very little time to adjust. Some Girls in 1978 had shown that the band was still capable of responding to cultural change rather than simply ignoring it. The album incorporated punk energy and disco rhythms with enough conviction to feel current rather than desperate, and its commercial performance proved that the audience had not entirely abandoned them. But one good album was not the same as a solved problem. The riff, the song that saved them, had been sitting in a vault for years without anyone realizing what it was. Start Me Up had been recorded during the Some Girls sessions in 1978 as a reggae-influenced track, a loose and unhurried version that never felt quite right and was eventually set aside without much deliberation. It joined the substantial archive of Rolling Stones outtakes that accumulated over decades of prolific recording, unreleased and largely forgotten. Then in 1981, during the sessions for what would become Tattoo You, someone put the old tape on. and someone in that room heard something that the 1978 version had buried underneath the wrong arrangement. They heard the riff, that 6-note guitar figure that Keith Richards had been playing at the top of the track. Deceptively simple on the surface, but carrying an energy and an attitude that was impossible to ignore once you stripped away the reggae rhythm underneath it and replaced it with something that hit harder and faster and more directly. The decision to rebuild the track around that riff, rather than the original reggae groove, transformed it completely. What had been a pleasant album experiment became something else entirely, an opening statement so confident and so immediate that it announced itself within the first 3 seconds in a way that very few rock songs ever manage. The riff did not build toward anything. It arrived fully formed and completely certain of itself, which is the only way a song like that works. Any hesitation in it, and the whole thing collapses. There was no hesitation. Tattoo, You, and the Tour. Tattoo You was released in August 1981, and it was, in the most technical sense, not really a new album at all. The majority of its tracks were outtakes and unfinished recordings pulled from sessions stretching back years, polished and completed specifically for this release. Okay, by any conventional logic, it should have felt like a stopgap, a holding pattern, while the band figured out what they actually wanted to say next. Instead, it became their biggest commercial success in years. Start Me Up reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 3 in the United Kingdom, figures that the band had not approached since the mid-1970s. The album itself went to number 1 in multiple countries and stayed on the charts for months. Critics who had been questioning the band's relevance 2 years earlier were suddenly writing about a remarkable creative resurgence. The 1981 American tour that followed became the largest grossing concert tour in rock history up to that point. The Stones played to over 2 million people across 50 cities, with Start Me Up opening almost every single show and delivering the same effect every single time. That opening riff, hitting a stadium crowd of 60 or 70,000 people in the first seconds of the night, created a collective physical reaction that eyewitnesses consistently described as something beyond ordinary concert excitement. It was closer to a detonation. The legacy. What Exile on Main Street and Start Me Up together say about the Rolling Stones is something that goes beyond the usual language of legacy and influence, beyond the sales figures and the chart positions and the critical reassessments. What they say is something more fundamental and more surprising than any of that. They say that chaos is not the enemy of greatness, that the most controlled and perfectly executed creative processes do not automatically produce the most powerful results. Exile on Main Street was made in conditions that should have produced nothing of value, and instead produced what many serious music critics consider the greatest rock album ever recorded. Start Me Up was a discarded experiment that sat forgotten in a vault for 3 years before someone heard what it actually was. Both of them arrived from unexpected directions, through unlikely circumstances, by a band that had no business succeeding at that particular moment and succeeded anyway. The Rolling Stones continued recording and touring for decades after both of these moments, releasing albums into the 2020s and performing in stadiums well into their 70s and 80s. The deaths of Charlie Watts in 2021 and, of course, Brian Jones decades earlier gave the story its share of genuine tragedy. But the band never stopped, which is itself a kind of statement about what music meant to the people who made it. More than 6 decades after Rudolf Schenker formed his first band in Hanover, and 3 years before the Beatles played their last rooftop concert, 5 young men from London started playing American blues in small clubs and dreamed of something larger. What they built was not just a career, it was a monument to the idea that if the music is strong enough, nothing else can stop it. Not chaos, not addiction, not cultural irrelevance, not even time itself. Some things genuinely do not get erased, they get engraved. And the Rolling Stones are one of them. The Rolling Stones never asked for permission to survive. They just kept playing, kept recording, and kept proving every critic and every doubter completely wrong decade after decade. If this story reminded you why they remain untouchable, hit like, subscribe, and tell us your favorite Stones era in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.